Welcome back to the channel. Today we're diving into a topic that might make some of you uncomfortable, but it's something every man has felt at some point. How a woman starts regretting her actions once you genuinely stop caring. And before you jump to conclusions, this isn't about revenge or playing games. It's about understanding human behavior and the dynamics that happen when someone finally realizes what they've lost. I've seen this countless times in my work as a therapist. Men come to me frustrated, wondering why the woman who once seemed distant or careless suddenly starts acting differently when they stop chasing her. What I've learned over the years is simple but harsh. Often regret only surfaces when the other person feels the weight of your absence, when they notice your attention, your energy, your care is no longer there. Imagine someone repeatedly taking you for granted, dismissing your value, and treating your attention like it's disposable. You try to show them patience, empathy, even love, but nothing changes. Then one day you quietly step back. You stop texting first. You stop making all the effort. You stop being emotionally available the way you used to. And suddenly, you notice subtle changes. The texts become more frequent, the tone softer, the curiosity about your life peaking again. What's happening here isn't magic, it's psychology. Humans tend to recognize value only when it's no longer freely available. And while it may sound controversial to say that some women only realize your worth when you stop caring, it's a pattern I've seen over and over. This isn't about labeling or shaming. It's about helping you recognize the signs so you don't waste your energy and can approach your relationships with clarity and confidence. In this video, I'll break down 7 clear signs she's starting to regret her actions once you step back, helping you understand what's happening beneath the surface and how to respond without losing yourself in the process. She suddenly checks in more often. 1. She suddenly checks in more often. The first sign you'll notice is that she suddenly starts checking in more often. Now, this doesn't happen the moment you stop showing her attention. It usually takes a little time. When someone is used to having your care and energy on tap, the absence of it creates a quiet but powerful shift. I've seen this countless times in my practice. A man comes in feeling confused, almost guilty, because the woman who seemed distant or indifferent is now reaching out, sometimes with simple messages, sometimes just small gestures of contact. And it can feel strange, almost like the roles have reversed overnight. It's important to understand why this happens. People often don't fully realize the value of something until it's gone. When you were always there answering her messages, showing interest, she may not have been paying attention to how much effort you were putting in. It wasn't that she didn't care at all. It's just that humans can become complacent. But when you step back, withdraw that energy, and stop making yourself immediately available, she starts to notice the absence. And that absence, that quiet space where you used to be, begins to create a sense of discomfort. She senses the shift, even if she can't articulate it clearly. In my experience, men often misread these early attempts as coincidental or casual, but they're rarely random. It's her mind testing the waters, gauging whether your disengagement is permanent or just temporary. She's beginning to feel a subtle pull of regret, a realization that she may have underestimated your presence in her life. I've seen men describe this as the first soft warning sign. She's reaching out, but it's different now. The tone of her messages changes. The questions she asks carry more personal curiosity, and she might even try to reestablish the connection on topics that once didn't matter to her. Here's what's crucial for you to notice. This is not about chasing her back. This is about observation. Pay attention to how she approaches you now that you're no longer immediately available. The timing, the effort, and the subtle increase in attention tell a story about her changing mindset. From a therapeutic perspective, this moment is significant because it reflects her growing awareness of your value and the consequences of her past actions. It's an early signal that the dynamic is shifting, and it's entirely within your control how you respond. So, when you see her checking in more often, don't immediately react. Notice, reflect, and understand that this is the beginning of a pattern. She's feeling the impact of your absence, and it's revealing her true feelings in a way she may never have shown while you were always available. This is the moment where clarity starts to emerge for both of you and where you can observe the subtle ways regret begins to manifest. Her responses get warmer and personal. 2. Her responses get warmer and personal. The second sign is that her responses suddenly get warmer and more personal. Now, this is one of the most telling indicators that she's starting to feel the consequences of your absence. I've had countless men in my practice who come in frustrated saying, "She's texting me differently now, but I don't know why." And what they often don't realize is that the warmth you're seeing isn't just friendliness, it's a subtle form of acknowledgement. She's recognizing the value of your presence, and her behavior begins to reflect that awareness. When someone loses consistent access to your attention, the natural response isn't always immediate confrontation or guilt. It's subtle adjustment. She starts to engage differently, and those small shifts are often easier to notice once you're paying attention. Messages that were once short, vague, or even indifferent now carry a tone of genuine interest. She asks questions about your day, your work, or even your feelings in ways she never did before. These changes are not accidental. They're the product of her realizing that the emotional energy she may have taken for granted is no longer guaranteed. Here's an important lesson for men to understand. Warmth and personalization are not the same as reconciliation or a full emotional turnaround. Think of it like this. When someone senses that you're stepping back, their brain begins to weigh the cost of losing you. It's not a calculated game. It's human psychology. Suddenly, she notices things she overlooked before. The way you make her laugh, the advice you gave her, the way you consistently show up. And as a result, her responses carry more thought, more care, and a subtle attempt to reconnect on a deeper level. In my experience, observing these changes can be eye-opening. Men often misinterpret this warmth as a green light to jump back in, to resume the same patterns that led to frustration in the first place. This is where education is key. The warmth is not a sign of weakness on your part. It's a reflection of her growing awareness. You have to recognize it as information, not validation. It's a signal that your withdrawal is having the intended effect of creating space and clarity. And it's also a reminder to maintain your own boundaries. So, when her responses get warmer and more personal, take a moment to analyze. Notice how she communicates differently, what topic she chooses, and whether her effort is consistent or sporadic. These subtle cues tell you a lot about her mindset without requiring her to spell it out. The key is to observe without rushing, to see the psychology behind her behavior rather than reacting. Emotionally, this is where many men gain insight, and it's also where you start to understand the true power of stepping back, not just in dating, but in any relationship. By educating yourself to recognize this sign, you start seeing patterns that reveal much more than just surface-level regret. You begin to understand human behavior, attachment, and the way our absence can highlight value in ways constant presence never could. 3. She brings up past, she brings up past. Moments you shared, moments you shared. The third sign is that she starts bringing up past moments you shared. And this one is fascinating because it often catches men off guard. I've worked with men who tell me, "I stopped reaching out and suddenly she's talking about the time we did or saying she misses those little things I used to do." It's subtle, but it's one of the most revealing signs that regret is starting to creep in. These moments aren't random. They're a reflection of her mind circling back to what she once overlooked. From a psychological perspective, humans have a tendency to romanticize the past when something or someone no longer feels readily available. It's not just nostalgia, it's a subconscious way of evaluating value. When she starts mentioning shared memories, what she's really doing is testing the emotional waters. She's trying to gauge whether you've truly moved on and whether there's still a connection she can tap into. In therapy, I often describe this as the memory trigger effect. The brain uses emotional recall to reassess what was lost, and that reassessment can spark real feelings of regret. Here's why this is particularly important for men to understand. When she talks about the past, it's rarely about manipulation at this stage. It's genuine reflection, even if it comes across as indirect. She's noticing patterns in your past behavior that she may have taken for granted, moments where you gave more than she realized, and suddenly, in your absence, those moments carry weight. In many cases, men describe feeling a shift in energy when these memories surface. She's softer, more thoughtful, and sometimes even vulnerable in her tone. That's a big change from someone who seemed indifferent or dismissive before. What I often advise men in these situations is to observe carefully, not react impulsively. This isn't the moment to immediately re-engage or overcorrect. Instead, it's a chance to understand the dynamics at play. When she brings up past experiences, pay attention to the emotional cues. Is she acknowledging your effort, reflecting on shared happiness, or suddenly expressing regret? These are the indicators that her mindset is shifting. It's a sign that your withdrawal is having an effect and that she's beginning to recognize the value of what she may have ignored. Another interesting aspect is that this reflection often comes out in unexpected ways through casual conversation, jokes, or even in her tone when she recounts a shared moment. It's a quiet but powerful way of expressing what she couldn't articulate before. Over time, these references to the past can intensify, evolving into more meaningful attempts to reconnect or understand what she lost. But the key for men is to remain grounded, to notice without chasing, and to recognize that this is information, not necessarily an invitation. So, when she starts bringing up past moments, see it as a signal, not a call to action. It's a window into her subconscious regret, a sign that she's starting to measure what she let go of. And for you, it's a chance to observe, reflect, and maintain the clarity that comes from stepping back in the first place. The past isn't just a story anymore, it's a message. 4. You notice subtle efforts. You notice subtle efforts to impress you to impress you. The fourth sign is that you start noticing subtle efforts to impress you. Again, I remember working with a client who had been in a relationship for a few years. He described how his partner, who had grown distant over time, suddenly began paying attention to little details he had always valued once he stopped putting in the same level of effort. For instance, she began dressing differently around him, showing up on time for plans, and even referencing hobbies or interests he had mentioned months before. It wasn't overt or dramatic, but the shift was undeniable. What I often tell men is that these changes are not random. When someone has become accustomed to taking your attention for granted, the withdrawal of that energy triggers a subtle but powerful response. In my client's case, the woman didn't suddenly develop new interests out of nowhere. Instead, she was responding to the reality that his emotional availability wasn't infinite anymore. She started realizing that her previous behavior, where she might have ignored or dismissed him, was costing her access to his attention and care. This is one of the clearest signs that regret is beginning to settle in. She's quietly trying to re-establish her position in your life. In relationships, I see this pattern emerge over and over. Men often mistake these efforts as a return to the way things were, but that's not necessarily accurate. It's less about reconciliation and more about acknowledgement. She's testing whether you still value the connection and at the same time gauging if she still holds significance in your world. The interesting part is how subtle these behaviors are. It's in the little gestures, remembering what makes you laugh, commenting on something meaningful to you, or even sharing parts of her day that she never used to. These actions are her way of signaling that she notices your absence and is responding to it emotionally. For men in a relationship, understanding this sign can be transformative. Take my client's experience. He had been frustrated for months, feeling unappreciated and unsure if his partner even cared. Once he stepped back, she started making small but deliberate gestures that showed she had begun to notice what she had taken for granted. The key takeaway here is not to jump back in or overcorrect. Instead, observe the change and use it as insight. Recognize that her behavior is a reflection of her awareness and her emerging regret, not necessarily a full emotional turnaround. From a therapeutic perspective, noticing these subtle attempts to impress is about learning to read the emotional landscape. It's about understanding human behavior. When someone feels your value is no longer guaranteed, they adjust. That adjustment is where regret starts to surface. By maintaining your boundaries and staying aware, you can see these behaviors for what they are: signals that your presence matters and that your withdrawal has shifted the dynamic in a meaningful way. So, if you notice your partner or someone in your life starting to make small, thoughtful efforts, understand this is a sign that your absence is being felt. It's a quiet acknowledgement of what she may have overlooked and the beginning of regret settling in. How you respond is entirely your choice, but the awareness itself is powerful. 5. She questions her choices. Out loud, choices out loud. The fifth sign is that she starts questioning her choices out loud. I've worked with men who have shared stories about how their partners, after a period of distance, begin to verbalize doubts or reflections about how they acted in the relationship. One client told me about a period when he had stopped chasing his partner, stopped putting in constant effort that went unnoticed, and simply focused on himself. A few weeks later, she began asking things like, "Do you remember why we drifted?" Or, "Do you think I handled that the right way?" These questions weren't accusatory, they were revealing. In relationships, when someone starts to question their decisions, it's often a reflection of internal regret. It's a sign that they're becoming aware of the consequences of their actions, especially how their behavior may have pushed someone valuable away. In my client's case, his partner wasn't suddenly trying to argue or blame him. She was genuinely reflecting on the past, trying to understand her role in the dynamic. This is important for men to understand. These questions are a window into her growing self-awareness, triggered directly by your decision to stop overinvesting emotionally. I've observed that when a woman begins voicing doubts or reflections, it's a subtle but significant shift in the emotional balance of the relationship. She's recognizing that the effort, patience, or attention she may have taken for granted is no longer guaranteed. For the man in this story, it became clear that her reflection wasn't about manipulating him or trying to regain control. It was a psychological response to realizing that he had boundaries and that she couldn't automatically rely on his attention anymore. This stage is tricky, and it's where many men make mistakes. Some hear the questioning and immediately rush to reassure, apologize, or overcompensate, thinking it's a chance to fix things. But from a therapist's perspective, it's more productive to treat this as information. Observe what she's saying, notice the tone, and pay attention to whether these reflections come with genuine introspection or just surface-level curiosity. For example, in my client's situation, she started to share more about her thoughts and feelings regarding past arguments and mistakes, showing vulnerability that hadn't been present before. That vulnerability was her way of processing regret internally, prompted by the absence of his previous constant engagement. Understanding this sign is empowering for men. When she begins questioning her choices, it's evidence that your decision to step back is creating impact. It's not about forcing her to regret. It's about recognizing the natural emotional responses that emerge when someone begins to realize your value. It's a chance to reflect on the relationship from a clearer perspective and to maintain boundaries while she navigates her feelings. So, when you notice her questioning her actions or choices, pay attention, listen, observe, and understand that this is a manifestation of awareness and emerging regret. It's not a crisis, and it's not manipulation. It's simply the human mind responding to absence, and it's one of the clearest signs that your withdrawal is being noticed and appreciated, even if silently. 6. She mirrors your interests or lifestyle. The sixth sign is that she starts mirroring your interests or lifestyle. This is one of the more subtle signs, and it often catches men by surprise because it doesn't come with obvious words like "I miss you" or "I regret it." I've had clients share experiences where after stepping back and giving themselves space, they noticed their partner suddenly showing interest in things that mattered to them. One man told me how his girlfriend, who used to barely notice his hobbies or weekend routines, suddenly asked about his favorite activities, tried them herself, and even referenced things he had casually mentioned months earlier. From a psychological perspective, this behavior is fascinating. When someone feels the absence of your engagement, they start subconsciously assessing your value. Mirroring your interests is a subtle way of reconnecting emotionally and signaling attention. It's as if she's saying without words, I want to be closer to you and I'm trying to understand what makes you feel fulfilled. In therapy, I often explain to men that this isn't about changing yourself to win someone back. It's about noticing the shift in her mindset and understanding that she's starting to recognize what she previously overlooked. What's important for men to grasp here is that this sign is less about strategy and more about emotional realignment. She's beginning to see how much effort and passion you bring into your life, and she's drawn to that energy because she's starting to regret taking it for granted. Mirroring interests or lifestyle habits is her way of attempting to reconnect, but it's also a reflection of her awareness. She's noticing what she may have lost and trying to understand it more deeply. One client described it as subtle admiration. She wasn't overtly trying to impress him, but she was showing curiosity about his life in ways she hadn't before. I often advise men to view this as a learning moment rather than an invitation to jump back in fully. Observe, reflect, and appreciate the insight it gives you into her thought process. For example, in the client's case, he noticed that when she mirrored his interests, it was not constant or forced. It was authentic curiosity. That authenticity revealed her growing awareness and quiet regret. She wasn't manipulating him. She was processing internally the value of someone who had set clear boundaries and stopped overinvesting emotionally. From a broader perspective, mirroring is a sign of recognition. It's the human mind's way of reconnecting and testing emotional compatibility again. By observing this behavior without immediately reacting, men gain clarity about both themselves and their partner. They learn how absence can highlight value, how boundaries shift dynamics, and how subtle behaviors can reveal regret long before words are spoken. So, when you notice her showing more interest in your hobbies, asking questions about your routines, or adopting elements of your lifestyle, understand that this is not coincidence. It's a sign that your absence is being felt, your presence is missed, and she's beginning to recognize the unique value you bring to her life. Pay attention, stay grounded, and let this insight guide your understanding of the relationship dynamic. 7. She becomes emotionally vulnerable around you, emotionally vulnerable around you. The seventh and final sign is that she becomes emotionally vulnerable around you. This is often the clearest indication that she's beginning to feel the weight of her actions and recognize your value in ways she didn't before. I've had clients who described how after they stopped overextending themselves in the relationship, their partner started opening up in ways that had never happened when they were always readily available. Small confessions, sharing worries, or expressing feelings she had previously kept to herself all started to surface. From a psychological standpoint, emotional vulnerability is a response to absence and reflection. When someone is used to having constant access to your attention, they often shield themselves emotionally, either out of habit or because they take that access for granted. But once you create distance, they start noticing what they've missed. The support, the understanding, and the consistent presence that they may not have fully appreciated. I've seen this countless times in therapy sessions where men report their partners suddenly sharing deeper thoughts or concerns, testing the waters of emotional connection in a way that signals both curiosity and regret. This stage is particularly powerful because it's rooted in recognition. She's beginning to connect the dots between her past behavior and the present reality of your absence. Vulnerability here isn't about manipulation, it's about authenticity. One client shared how his partner, who had previously been distant or dismissive, started talking about her fears, doubts, and even moments she regretted. These were subtle admissions, not dramatic declarations, but they carried a weight that signaled she was processing her emotions and recognizing the value of his care and presence. For men, this is a critical sign to understand. Emotional vulnerability shows that she's no longer taking your presence for granted, and it often comes when regret has started to take root. But it's also an opportunity for you to observe and reflect. Many men make the mistake of immediately trying to fix things or re-engage fully, but the therapeutic perspective suggests a different approach. Notice, acknowledge internally and maintain boundaries. This way, you understand the shift without losing the clarity you've gained by stepping back. The key takeaway is that emotional vulnerability doesn't happen in isolation. It's usually preceded by the earlier signs: increased check-ins, warmer responses, references to the past, subtle efforts to impress, questions about choices, and even mirroring your interests. By the time she becomes vulnerable, you have a full picture of her shifting mindset and emerging regret. She's no longer simply reacting to you. She's reflecting, assessing, and expressing emotions she may have previously suppressed. So, when you notice her opening up in ways that feel new or deeper, understand that this is one of the most telling signs that she's beginning to recognize her actions and the value of what she lost. It's a moment of clarity for both of you, one that highlights the impact of your decision to step back, the power of absence, and the subtle ways regret can manifest over time. Observing this without overreacting is the key to understanding the dynamics at play and maintaining your own emotional strength in the process. In the end, recognizing conclusion. These signs isn't about winning someone back or playing games. It's about understanding human behavior and protecting your own emotional energy. When she checks in more often, responds warmly, brings up the past, makes subtle efforts, questions her choices, mirrors your interests, or becomes vulnerable, it's a clear reflection of awareness and emerging regret. The power lies in observing without overreacting, maintaining your boundaries, and letting absence highlight your value. By seeing these patterns, you gain clarity, confidence, and insight into the dynamics of relationships so you can navigate them with respect, awareness, and self-respect.